Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not.
Yes, indeed. Thank you to Uncle Barry. And our team of Outsiders this week are social commentator and writer Jane Caro, policy analyst for the Centre of Independent Studies, Tricia Jar, and freelance writer Elle Hardy. Welcome to you both.
Good morning. Hi, Jonathan.
Welcome to you both. Why did I say both? Because there are clearly three of you. That made no sense at all. Never mind. Speaking of no sense, how's politics, eh? What an extraordinary week. I've got the good questions, you know. I rather liked, as something of a summary, this from Tasmanian Independent Andrew Wilkie.
I think the standards are rock bottom at the moment. You know, the then Liberal National Opposition had us believe that the apparent anarchy in the previous Parliament was all because it was a hung Parliament. But it turns out that that's just the steady state in this place. You know, I think it illustrates why the Australian community it has, in my opinion, an unprecedented level of dissatisfaction, unhappiness, disappointment with politics and politicians and the political parties.
What do you reckon, Jane? I mean, there was all that talk in the last government before the election about the bitterness of the minority government and the sort of spite that was flying around. The tone doesn't seem to have shifted all that much.
At all? No. It seems easily as nasty and depressing and kind of rock bottom in terms of the way each side deals with the other, and also the kinds of things that we're obsessing about and the way we're behaving. Not just in the Parliament, but as a nation. It's a fairly depressing time to be Australian, in my view.
There was a moment, Elle, and this was around Qantas. Now, and the way in which the Qantas thing has been discussed, I think, was a real example of how things are working at the moment, that we have an airline in trouble, that there's calls on the government to do X, Y and Z to sort of try and help it out. And then in Parliament, in this weird parallel universe of the purely political, we have a wedge applied to try and trap the opposition on a vote on the Qantas Sale Act, which is a thing that the Liberal Party opposed when the Labor Party tried it in the last term, and a thing that the Liberal Party now thinks is a good thing, but the Labor Party's opposing. Meanwhile, Qantas, why does the reality not coincide with politics?
Well, I think we've flatlined at hysterical, which is a pretty poor place to be, and we just don't seem to be capable of having a sophisticated debate in this country about the nature of things. I mean, Labor is essentially playing the race card now on Qantas. They've said, Albanese said on Friday, the flying panda or the flying camel, not the flying British bulldog or the flying kiwi. So it's
could be the flying croissant.
Maybe. But it is very sad that, you know, we have a real pallor of political debate, and we just need somehow someone to find some sophistication.
Is there I mean, can we find a source for why this happens, Tricia? I mean, do we blame somebody here, or is it the fault of the entire sort of the political thing, and then the way in which it's reported and the way in which we accept it as a sort of a cyclical, circular thing?
It's probably closer to the latter. I mean, as amusing as it is to see Malcolm Turnbull sort of suck it to Stephen Conroy in the manner in which he did this week.
That was rather good.
Yeah, it was very amusing. I was very impressed. But at the same time, I mean, that kind of exemplifies the sideshow that we see in Parliament. I mean, we've got a lot of people, you know, often very talented performers, and they're able to make quite a good show of it, kind of playing their little partisan games. But at the end of the day, I think overall, it's just a cover-up for what's basically a very depressing time in democracy. And I don't think that's even just an Australian thing. I think that's quite possibly worldwide.
But it's not it's not just, Jane, is it a depressing time for the process of the democracy? I mean, in our particular case, it's a very tough time on a whole lot of really serious issues, and some difficult things are being done.
Yes, it seems to be, but then again, we keep getting, we've had 23 years of continuous growth. Why is it such a tough time? It's partly a tough time because politicians have decided, and society at large has decided, that we're not allowed to enjoy any prosperity, that we constantly have to ramp up. And there's this real hard edge to this idea that either you are always in there giving 150%, this is at work, this is in the parliament, this is, as a parent, doesn't matter where it is, you've got to give 150% or you're a loser and a failure and we don't like you and we can toss you aside as kind of a useless person. We've become extremely lacking in compassion, very inhumane. It's all about what you can earn, what you can achieve, what marks you get. It's never about who you are as a human being. We have a highly exhausted, totally anxious, blame-driven population, and I put this down fairly and squarely, in fact, to the mantra of accountability, which is inhuman and blame-centred, and I'd like to see it replaced across the board. I'm sorry I'm being really over the top about this. With responsibility. Let's get back to some human measures and leave room for mistakes, and I really think this is a deep philosophical problem in the West.
Leaving room for mistakes,
everywhere.
I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, and if you apply that to the political setting, there's this assumption that the politics, you're exemplary, you're blameless, and you have to present yourself as being beyond criticism. If we could sit there as two groups of people and have a discussion which allowed error, which allowed fault, which allowed blame, it might be more positive.
If we sought success instead of spend all our time avoiding failure, I think we'd have a very different world.
Oh, what do you make of that?
I mean, look, obviously I broadly agree. It's just so hard to pinpoint where exactly the fault is. But I think it sort of becomes cyclical in that governments and oppositions keep blaming each other for absolutely everything that happens when macroeconomics is such a complex thing. And, we're seeing a global downturn in economies, especially in developing nations, which is probably having far more impact than any single policy or suite of policies that the government can bring out here. So it is, I guess, about what I said earlier with, really raising the sophistication of the debate.
Still, at least we have tough guys in charge.
He is an absolutely outstanding minister. He's doing a great job for our country. You don't want a wimp running border protection. You want someone who is strong.
Trish, who would you like running border protection?
I don't know. I just know that I don't want Scott Morrison running it. Well, I mean, with as much sympathy as I can muster for poor Scott, that is really a poison chalice portfolio. But at the same time, I mean, it is quite disturbing to me seeing the notion that we need some sort of big, strong, like Ajax-type figure protecting our borders from, a couple of thousand people a year. It seems to me, it just seems like it's completely disproportionate to what's actually going on.
And when it's an issue, too, that basically the political class care about and people in the country not so much, it's a weird issue in that respect. And Jane, I don't know if you saw the story this morning, the Fairfax papers from Bianca Hall, talking about the spin doctor team in the Immigration Department, a department notorious for its silence, apparently employs 66 spin doctors, which dwarfs the 39 media and communication staff currently employed by the Prime Minister and the ministers on his front bench. Jane Carrot, you've got a bit of experience in communication. How much harder is it, in fact, to say nothing than to give out information? Is that what's behind the 66-strong team?
I think that's right, and I think, in fact, unfortunately, the greater the number of spin doctors you've got, the more you've got to hide, and the more difficult the message is you have to send, and more unpalatable. I think this is another problem with our ramped-up fury in society and in Parliament, that politicians want to control the message. They want to control how the media responds. And so they are becoming less and less willing to be open, to be honest and transparent, because they're frightened of the consequences. The media, therefore, immediately, it's like a dance. The media, therefore, gets more and more suspicious, pushes harder and harder and harder to break down that control. And so you get this spiralling between the two as a sort of death roll, like a crocodile and a boa constrictor or something, as they strangle each other to death. And I think the secrecy is one of the things that terrifies me most about our border protection. If what we're doing is reasonable, humane, and justifiable, and there's an argument to support how we are doing it, then why isn't the press allowed into those camps? Why must it be kept secret? And why is there such a need to control the information? All that indicates to me is that we know what we're doing is wrong and we're ashamed of it, and therefore we're tying ourselves in knots trying to make it palatable.
And yet, Elle, what we're doing is by the government's rules and the standard they set, effective.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that we must remember that these measures the government are taking are incredibly popular. And there was an Essential poll in January, I think, and it was something like over 25% of people still thought the measures weren't tough enough. 15% of Green voters thought that the measures still aren't tough enough. So we're on a unity ticket with regards to transparency, but we need to understand that this is these measures are incredibly popular with the public.
Is that sufficient excuse for the sort of toughness that we're exercising, that people want it to be even tougher?
No, it's not an excuse, but I think it's obviously the genesis of this, and really the debate. We can't just continue to focus on Scott Morrison. It's really, sort of have to turn the mirror on ourselves and see as a society what we want. And I guess we more or less had an election based on what people want, and it's very unfortunate that the issue just has to go broader.
Patricia, I mean, is that reasonable that our immigration policy, the toughness of that stand, simply reflects who we are?
This probably sounds quite Debbie Downer of me, but I think that's actually the case. I mean, I think Ella's absolutely right in what she says. The polling suggests that it's the people who are driving this, not the other way around. Whether that was so at the beginning, like whether this all started with Tampa, I can't say. But it's definitely... I mean, I wonder if it's... One of the excuses that is often sort of bandied about is that the reason why part of the reason why the political class has instituted such a tough regime on asylum seekers is so that they can shore up, I guess, public support for a large skilled immigration program. But I actually wonder if that's not the other way around. I wonder if the reason why people are so insecure about asylum seekers is because they have broader problems with our skilled immigration program. But basically, I think the entire thing is incredibly dishonest, and at some point, politicians are going to actually have to answer for what they've been doing.
Well, they'll answer using a skilled team of 66 immigration professionals.
Yes, exactly.
But there is just one thing I'd like to say. I don't think we can negate, and maybe this is part of our problem with our politicians and our leadership in general, leadership from this. We actually look to our leaders, or we should, to actually play to our better selves, not to our worst selves. And we saw with Malcolm Fraser and the Vietnamese boat people, we saw to a lesser extent Bob Hawke with the Chinese students from and Tiananmen Square, where leaders can actually awake in the population their better selves. And what frightens me about what we're doing now is we've given up on that. We're not interested in trying to make people be their best. Oh, no. We're just pandering to the dark side in people.
Well, it's interesting that there have been a rash of stories in this past week on the sort of the Swiftian modest proposal line where they're talking about shooting boats out of the water as if that's a logical extension of what we're doing.
How bad do we get?
Maybe it is. 10 minutes away from 10, outsiders. They are Jane Caro, Trish Jar and Elle Hardy. Now, if it was one person's week in federal parliament, it was this person.
And I can think of no one more likely to deal with all of the other formidable characters in this place without fear.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. I believe that Mr Mitchell has just reflected on you in the chair with that statement.
Well, I think I can handle it when I made my ruling. I'm sorry, you were not properly on your feet. You should have been sitting down.
Define what it means to be properly on your feet in this House. Because there is nothing in practice, no precedent anywhere. You are on your... No speaker in the history of this Parliament behaved the way you are behaving now.
I think in my long history of listening to Australian Federal Parliament, the notion of not being properly on your feet because you were sitting down, that was, for me, a golden moment. Bromham Bishop, Jane Caro, how's she travelling?
Well, she's certainly stirring up trouble. and making herself, loved of by people of one persuasion and hated by those on the other, which is the pattern of modern politics in Parliament. It's very ideological, it's very divided, and she seems to be going with that rather than stopping it.
Well, she's sort of a speaker for our times. I mean, she's not really pretending to be even-handed.
No, but that's the way that this government operates. I think we know that they enjoy the fight. I just look forward to the feminists of Australia celebrating the virtues of this particular strong woman.
Yes.
In politics.
Feminism doesn't mean you like every woman, okay? That's a nonsensical perspective.
I just think when compared to Gillard and people, I suppose, lionising her for her strength as a woman, it's just interesting to note the contrast with Bishop that we don't see that.
She's a tough nut, though. And Trish, I wonder, though, the way in which she conducts herself in the chair, what that says about the government's respect for the institution, I guess, combined with things like, for example, the release of cabinet documents in the Pink Bats Royal Commission. Is there sort of a trend there of being a bit iconoclastic in this government?
I'm not entirely sure that 2 data points represents a trend, but I definitely have problems with both of those things, with Bronwyn Bishop's, veneer of being non-partisan and unbiased, and the fact that, the 30-year rule exists for a reason. But I think it's...
As you say, it's hard to draw a line between them.
Yeah, it's so far. But, I guess I'm open to the idea that this is only going to get worse from here on out. And one thing that I've always noticed, and this is through my experience in the Liberal Party as well, former experience, just going to put that out there, is that there does seem to be a sort of sense that the rules can be bent if we're the ones who are in charge, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now. I mean, the Pink Bats Royal Commission is obviously just a sort of a political witch hunt, and nobody's really paying attention to it.
Let's see how that plays out. It's time that we heard from First Dog and some thoughts he has on the Leader of the Opposition, and our thanks to our outsiders this morning, Jane Caro, Trish Jar and Elle Hardy. It's coming up to 5 to 10. Hello, Patriots. Welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I am First Dog on the Moon, a Walkley Award winner, and the first cartoonist ever to win a fist fight with Chris Mitchell's hair. Today we are discovering the real Australia, with another exciting edition of our series, Discovering the Real Australia. It's a normal Saturday morning in downtown Wuckers'ville. The good burghers of this typical Aussie rural regional centre, population 8,000 and some chickens, are going about their regular Saturday routine, wandering about and doing whatever it is people who don't live in the actual country or in a proper city do on a Saturday. But wait, what is this in the sky? Is it a bird? Is it an interesting piece of paper? No, it's a man. It's Bob Snurton to the rescue. You heard right, folks. It's Blib Stoughton, the leader of the Australian Labor Party in the federal opposition. You remember him, not just a faithless man. Bolt Spouting is a man of many words, just not always necessarily in the right order or the way around that you want them to be to understanding him. So look out, Tony Abbott. Bert Fonsons is here to save the day. It's Bin Snorkler to the rescue. The troubled citizens of Wuckers'ville are milling about in a bit of a flap as Bloat Scrotum arrives in their midst. Hello, everyone. I'm Bert Stollen. Oh, cry the grateful citizens. Help us, Babs Putin. Help us, Dim Sturtlington, they all plead as one. One old fellow steps forward. Oh, please save us, Blorp. Deliver us from this pack of crooks who are running the nation into the ground. Tell us how you will stop the deranged inhuman juggernaut that is the Abbott Prime Ministership. Well, that's a very interesting
question, Barbara. I'm Bilbo Flubers, and I'm here to use the wrong words while holding the government to account for all the things. Things like stuff the government is doing that they should be held to account for. With the words. Several months into their government, several months have passed while they govern, and yet here I am wearing this fetching cape and my underpants outside my trousers in regional Australia with a stern look on my face. This government has a lot to answer for if I'm not Bint Flatterer, and I am. As I said previously earlier, any government I lead, a boob snizzler government, would still have all the wrong words in all the places where you wanted other words to be in. Yes, frustratingly, you still know what I'm talking about. It is very frustrating to listen to when I am talking. And that's because I am Bump Frutter to the rescue!
And then Bent Squizzler went to sit quietly on a bench in the park and wait for the Prime Minister to become so unpopular that everyone just put him in charge regardless of how boring and inarticulate he was, with all the being boring and inarticulate all the time. It worked for Tony like the clappers. Finally, Bjorn Reuter had this to say. I'm Glib Futon, and I promise you this. I will use my amazing superpower of people not being able to remember who I am, what I stand for, or even to listen to a single word I say without their eyes rolling back in their heads and their tongues lolling out of their mouths and pretty much falling into a coma. That is how I will hold this government to account for doing an even better job of implementing the cruel and vicious policies that we came up with better than we could, those bastards. And that's because I'm Flap Blue Tack to the rescue! People often ask me why am I like this. They say, oh well, at least Albo could tell a joke. I don't know what any of that means, but let me just say this. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. Thank you for your time. Rare insights there, Gay.
Well, yeah. No, Wuckers'ville was probably the funniest thing that he said. No wuckin' furries. Which is, of course, a spoonerism. And there's a lot of people who quite honestly think that there is no wuckin' furries with what's going on with immigration. Australian politics. Can it get any worse? Yeah, of course it can get worse. What could happen next, to make it worse, is if the Liberal National Party gets an even bigger handhold on the Senate in the rerun of the Western Australian Senate election, which has to happen because almost 1,400 votes just so happened to disappear in the last election. But what can I say? What can I say? Australian politics is just woeful at the moment. Absolutely woeful. They're sort of running around whistling, trying to make the music continue while they play deck chairs on the economic Titanic. They can't actually affect anything. And in their efforts to prop up the sinking economy, they're destroying the social fabric of society and blaming each other for doing it. It's all a plot by the unions, or it's all a plot by the corrupt politicians. And we've got some pretty significant corruption going on there. What with Fiona Nash misleading the Senate, telling lies about how there was no conflict of interest when her chief of staff, who owned only one share in the lobbying company that employed his wife, directed the takedown of a healthy eating website. Government Health Commission had spent thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of dollars putting the website together. The day the website went up, the lobbying company rang, well, the fast food company rang the Chief of Staff of the Assistant Health Minister, and he, who only had one share in the lobbying company that his wife works for, which works exclusively for the fast food industry, he ordered the site to be taken down, and that wasn't a conflict of interest. Not even when it was found that not only did he still have his one share in that company, he also had all the shares of the holding company, which owned all the other shares of the lobbying company that his wife was employed by. But Tony Abbott's not going to admit that that was misleading Parliament or conduct unbecoming of a minister, because it's his minister who's doing something sniffy. Therefore it's okay. Not a drama. Not for the Liberal Party. As the outsiders said, any time the Liberal Party is in opposition, they get deeply vexed at the idea that the Labor Party may not be actually playing by the fairest of rules. As soon as the Liberal National Party goes in, there's no such thing as fairness. Their whole idea is to rig the game so that they and their mates can get the contracts and make all the fat money. And the people in no Wuckers'ville just keep buying it. They just keep paying the tax and going to work. But now the jobs are disappearing, so will the people in no Wuckers'ville continue to put up with their alleged leadership from the politicians? Got me stuff. Don't know why they were paying attention to them in the first place. All I can say is vote green or die, and learn to rain dance. Nothing else seems to make much sense. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.